we're not trying to just burn fat in these races. We're trying to just be better at burning fat, and we still eat carbs strategically. Like I said, at a big hill climb, I'll eat a little bit more carbs than what I do later on in the race. The difference is we just don't eat as many carbs.
Hey everybody, welcome to the For Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Shorenstein. I'm a registered dietitian in New York City. Today's episode features elite ultra-runner and low-carb high-fat athlete Mike McKnight. I really wanted to interview Mike as we often hear about low-carb, high-fat, or ketogenic style diets, especially in the endurance world, but it's not something I typically recommend to my athletes at least, and it's something that I really wanted to learn more about and just explore how it works among someone who's highly competitive and successful in their sport. So Mike and I talked all about that, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Mike has lived his entire life in Utah until just recently, actually right before we recorded, when he moved his family to Denver, Colorado to continue his job as event and sponsorship manager over at Ultra, which is a great shoe company if you haven't heard of them. His thing is 200 milers. Yes, you got that right. It's a very long distance. He has won the Triple Crown, which basically consists of 3 200-plus mile races. I say plus because it's either 205 or in the case of Moab, 240. And it's all within 2.5 months, so not leaving much time for recovery. He won it in 2017 with a combined time of 205 hours. This past August, he set a record and won Bigfoot 200 in Mount St. Helens, Washington. And we actually recorded this episode just a couple weeks before he won the Tahoe 200. So he's well on his way to winning the Triple Crown once again. Fingers crossed there, Mike. It was a really awesome race to watch. Sure, it's a slow one. It's not exactly, like watching a soccer match or anything else. But, it's 205 miles. And he actually finished less than 4 minutes ahead of the second male finisher. So that's pretty nuts. He is married with a 2-year-old. He's expecting another baby in December, so we definitely got to commiserate about having 2 little ones in the household. That should be fun for both of us. And he really has an interesting story. As you'll hear him talk about, he broke his back in a skiing accident back in 2012 and was told he'd never really run competitively again. But that, of course, didn't stop him. He pretty much was running a 10K within 6 weeks, and then things just kind of got better from there. So if he can run, then, with the accident that he's been through and all the challenges he's faced, I think anyone can, right? So I hope you enjoy my discussion with Mike. And again, a big congrats to him that he won Tahoe, and we're really looking forward to seeing how Moab goes. Enjoy, everybody. Hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Claire. How are you doing?
Good. Well, thanks so much for your time. You are about to run the Tahoe 200. You're about to move your entire family to Colorado from Utah, and that's 2 days later after the race, and run Moab 200 all while working. So to say that your schedule is busy is an understatement for sure. So I really appreciate you coming on and recording with me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So you grew up in Utah, you went to college in Utah. That is a part of the country that is just known for having so many trails and mountains and awesome stuff. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and, were you running and hiking, doing other sports at a young age? What did food nutrition look like? Let's get into that.
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Utah, a small town called Cornish. It's a town that's small enough that, people that live 20 minutes from here have never heard of it. So thing that's out here is just a lot of land and cattle. Mm-hmm. And I grew up on a dairy farm, and most of my childhood and teenage years were spent on that dairy farm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to, or if you know anybody that works on a dairy farm or not.
I do not.
You don't? Okay. No. Well, it's there's no vacation time. There's no time off. Like, the cows always need to be milked. So I was very active in the standpoint that I was out there in the fields and on the farm quite often working, but mm-hmm. I never really had time to get out and explore. So I didn't discover how amazing this area is for trail running until I was in my college years. So I missed out on a lot of that growing up.
Yeah. I mean, how young were you when your parents kind of put you to work on the farm?
I started feeding the calves. Yeah, I started feeding the calves when I was around 6 or 7. Uh-huh. That just took like an hour a day. But at that point, I'm sure it might be different these days, especially with families that are into hiking as a family, but I wasn't really like trying to find other stuff to do at that age. So
Mm-hmm.
once I got to the age where I was into exploring and everything like that, I was just so busy with school and on the farm that I didn't get out and do any of it.
What point did you start exploring other sports?
So when I was a senior in high school, I got into football and track. And when I say got into football, I wanted to be involved, and I had kind of a disadvantage at that point in high school because everyone on the team, for the most part, had been playing football like since their freshman year to their senior year. So I was kind of on the back end of the list, especially in terms of talent. So I did a lot of sitting and watching the team at football games, and then I decided to try track to see how I did there. But that was more of I threw the javelin, so I wasn't too much into running.
Mm-hmm.
At that point either. It wasn't until college that I got into running.
Yeah. And what about kind of in your household? I imagine dairy was a huge part of what was on the kitchen table. What did food look like? Who was doing the cooking? Were you interested in food at all? Was it just something that you kind of shoved in your mouth? Like, what did that look like?
So growing up, and even until about 4 years ago, I do not consider myself to have been a healthy person.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. We had the good milk, we had the fresh raw milk. And I remember the early college years, I would come home from college once a week, and I had like 5 gallons, like, the jugs of milk that you buy from the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
I had 5 of those empty, and I'd refill those every week, and I'd drink 5 gallons of the whole raw milk every week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I loved milk growing up. And, when I was a kid, and even until like 4 years ago too, I drank a lot of soda, and, we had biscuits and gravy
Uh-huh.
a lot of mornings. We had the good cuts of steak, so that was nice, but I did not follow any kind of diet. And
what about other dairy products? Were you guys using the milk to make other things?
no, and that's the kicker. Like I remember my parents would like skim the milk, like they'd let the milk sit for 3 days, and then they'd take the cream off of the top and just dump it down the drain.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's so sad.
Yeah, and I love cream right now.
So no fresh butter, no yogurt, no cheese, nothing like that?
No, we would get like discounted cheese and butter from a corporation that we would sell our milk to. And yeah, we didn't do any of the fresh whipped butter or anything like that.
Okay. Were you guys doing much like home cooked stuff, or was it not so much, just like all the energy was put into the farm?
No, my mom, she home cooked everything for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So it was me and my dad on the farm, my dad's brother, and a couple of cousins. So my mom, by the time that I was born, she didn't have to do much on the farm anymore. So she did cook everything home.
Yeah. Okay.
But, there's a lot of desserts and processed sugars and stuff like that. Like, tired all the time. So a lot of caffeine. There's just really no watching what I was eating.
Okay. So you weren't sleeping too much when you were young?
No.
And you're not sleeping too much anymore either with, how old's your child right now? You have a toddler, right?
Yeah, he's 2.5.
And another one on the way. So that will also disrupt some sleep. Okay. We'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about training. So you said, high school, you kind of got into things a bit more. At what point did you, discover running, and kind of what was in your backyard, your entire life?
So when I was 21, my sister, she was training for a half marathon, and she kind of challenged me to do the same and run it with her. And so I did that. I would run like 3 miles a day. I didn't like follow any specific training plan. I just did what I felt like, and then ran the half marathon. And I found that I did decent for the amount of training that I did, and I decided that I liked it. So I started running just to stay in shape. Mm-hmm. And then there was one day I just decided that I wanted to bust out a mile and see how fast I could do it. And so I did that, and it was under 5 minutes. It was between 4:52 and 4:55.
Nice.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked, especially when I wasn't I wouldn't say I was like training for anything. I was just running just for leisure. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I decided that if I started to train and put some effort into it, maybe I could walk on to Utah State University's track or cross country team. So I started training, and a couple of months after I started to get into my training, I was in a skiing accident and broke my back.
Oh, wow.
And so that kind of put everything on hold. Yeah. It was very unfortunate.
That was in 2012, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you had just started getting into the sport at that point.
Yeah.
You were basically told you weren't going to run, like you were going to be bedridden for a year and you weren't going to run again or something like that, right?
So I shattered my L1 vertebrae and like completely shattered it. So I wrecked skiing, and the ambulance came and picked me up, took me to the hospital. The next day they did a surgery on me and they took part of my hip bone out and fused that to my spine. And then they inserted 2 rods and 9 screws, which I still have in my back today. So they did that surgery. And a couple days later, since I was kind of getting into running, one of the questions I asked is when I could start running again.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor told me that with some luck and some good recovery, I would be able to start running again a year or so from the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 7 months to 8 months after the surgery, I can start exploring low impact exercises like swimming.
Mm-hmm.
But, running and anything demanding on the body like that to not think about for a year. So I had to drop out of college. I lost my job and I moved back home to my parents, moved out of my dorm, moved back home to my parents' house, and they took care of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just kind of, stuck in bed for a couple of weeks. My, what's it called? Like my physical therapy that the doctor prescribed for me was to just walk a mile a day. And so I had a walker and I would walk a mile a day with my walker. It was my grandma's walker. So
okay.
had like the wheels on it and all that
Nice.
stuff. So yeah, I'd go outside and I'd walk a mile a day. And about 2 weeks after my surgery, I started like walking 2 miles a day. I started trying to see how much quicker I could walk my mile, walk my 2 miles. So I kind of like started experimenting with, seeing how fast I can push myself at that point. And then 3 weeks after surgery, so a week after I started upping my mileage with my walking, I decided to give it a try, to give running a try.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. So, just looking back, I can tell that I've kind of had like a ultra runner mindset for a while without realizing it, just trying to push those limits.
I imagine you were in great pain at this point too. I mean, were you on all kinds of meds? Like, how are you coping with pain at this point?
Yep. So I was prescribed some pretty high dosage of Percocet to help with the pain.
Yeah, back pain's serious.
Yeah. So I was in a lot of pain, but I don't know why I recovered as quickly as I did, but I mean, I was fully running 10Ks and further 6 weeks after my surgery and nothing
amazing
happened. Yeah.
Wow. And what about, nutrition throughout this whole time? I mean, obviously when you are recovering, even just from normal training, but certainly after surgery, after injury, illness, all that stuff, your nutrition needs skyrocket and, protein needs and all that. So, what were you kind of doing there? But with pain, of course, sometimes your appetite suffers. So were you doing anything differently with your nutrition? Was it just kind of the same old stuff?
Same old stuff, but I was drinking the 5 gallons of whole milk every week. So
maybe that's your secret.
Maybe that's the secret. But no, nutrition was nothing to me at this point in my life. So I was just eating whatever I wanted. Mm-hmm. A lot of Panda Express.
Oh man, what do you order from Panda Express?
I always got just some of their breaded sugary chicken and ham fried rice.
That reminds me of growing up and like going to the mall like as a teenager, and I think I would get like the lo mein noodles and some horrendous greasy disgustingness. I don't know.
Yep.
Also, before I start getting to the trails, we were talking a little bit before about how we both kind of regret not taking advantage of our backyard trails when we were younger and how that would have changed our childhoods. But you know what? Hey, it makes you appreciate it so much more when you're an adult, right?
It does.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So tell me then, what kind of things looked like afterwards. So you kept running, you kept kind of getting stronger. Clearly, you were defying the doctor's advice. What was the doctor's response to that? Did you even tell the doctor you went running and did a 10K 6 weeks later?
No, I never told him.
Found a different doctor?
No, he just like, we had a few checkups after and he was just like, oh, I'm surprised at how fast you're recovering, but I never mentioned that I was running. So yeah, he still doesn't know.
Awesome. So yeah, tell me kind of how, your running kind of progressed and how you eventually got into ultras.
So at the very start of breaking my back, when I had to drop out of everything and when I was living in my parents' bedroom, I was very upset with where I was at with my life and just could not figure out why that had to have happened. Like, just super bitter. But looking back on it all, you can never predict what happens, but I feel that I found ultra running because of breaking my back.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is because I had a new job for a couple of weeks. I broke my back. When they found out I was going to be bedridden for who knows how long, they let me go. And so once I recovered so quickly, I had to find a new job. So I just found the first thing that I could take, which was a janitor at a plant here in Logan, Utah that makes LED signs.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing that, and I met a guy there who kind of we became pretty good friends. And then when he found out that I was into running, he introduced me to another guy who worked there who was also into running.
Mm-hmm.
And so he and I were talking. His name's Cody Draper, and in the ultra running world, his name is pretty known. He's a really good runner. We were talking, and I asked him if he was going to do that weekend. There was like a local 5K or 10K or something like that. And I asked him if he was going to run that. And his response, and it wasn't cocky or anything, that he just said that I typically don't do any races that are shorter than a marathon. And at that point, I had no idea that anything over a marathon existed.
Mind blown.
Yeah, mine was blown. So he told me he was training for a 50 miler, which blew my mind. Like, I think it was that following week was the 50 miler.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was just like, oh my gosh, like 50 miles, that's a thing. And he's like, yeah. And I'm even training later this year to do a 100 miler. And so it just completely took me aback. And he was the guy that got me into it. He had me pace him at that 100 miler, and he kept pushing me to do my first ultra. And a year later, I finally bit the bullet and signed up for my first ultra.
What was your first ultra?
It was just a local ultra here in Logan called the Logan Peak Race. And it's not your standard ultra distance. It was 28 miles, but it had about 7,000 feet of elevation gain, which was very intimidating for me.
Wow.
But so yeah, that was my first one, and I've been hooked ever since.
So talk to me about the nutrition side of things. You're starting to run more. You're doing these longer distances. You know, you didn't have you did have some track experience, some sporting experience, but, you know, a lot of people are doing like road stuff, marathons, and kind of getting into it. But yeah, so, I mean, were you using any sports products, eating real food? Like, were you thinking about nutrition at all? Was Cody talking to you about this stuff? You know, tell me a little bit about that.
So Cody, he doesn't follow any specific nutrition plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I first got into ultra running, I read an article in Trail and Ultra Running magazine, and it was like a Q&A with an ultra runner named Carl Meltzer.
Yeah, I know Carl. Mm-hmm.
You know Carl? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you know what his nutrition is like.
I actually don't. We were at a conference together some years back, but yeah, I don't think I know what his nutrition's like.
So in that article, one of the questions I asked him is what his nutrition's like, and his answer was, you know, along the lines of, if I want a burger, I'm going to eat a burger. If I want a beer, I'm going to drink a beer. I do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I adopted that very quickly. It was like, if I want a gallon of ice cream, I'm going to eat a gallon of ice cream. If I want a can of soda, so I didn't follow anything for the first part of my ultra running years.
Mm-hmm. But that's kind of like what you were doing before, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, but nothing. Well, I would say it heightened a little bit more. I had the mindset where I'm burning all these calories and running all these miles. So instead of a bowl of ice cream, I can have 5 bowls of ice cream if I want.
Okay. So it's basically everything you were doing just magnified.
More.
Yeah. Okay. And what about during your runs? Were you taking on any products there?
I tried everything. Yeah, nothing. I couldn't seem to find anything that I felt worked for me early on. Like, I'd have a good race and I'd be like, oh, this works for me. And then my next race, it wouldn't work for me. And I tried another race and it wouldn't work again. So a lot of my races early on, I would just experiment with, because there's so many brands out there. So many brands,
yep.
And so, yeah, nothing really worked for me early on that I was trying.
That was what year, your first ultra?
The first ultra was, so that 28 miler in Logan was in 2013. And then I got into, like, it was a year after that, 2014, that I ran my first 100 miler. And so I kind of got jumped in pretty quick, and I did a lot of ultras early on.
Okay, so you've been doing this for about 5-ish years now.
Yeah.
And, a quick glance at Ultra Signup shows that, you're running all kinds of distances. You've won a number of 100-milers, including this past March. But it does seem like you were particularly drawn to the 200-plus mile distance, or at least the Triple Crown of 200s, which I know you're in the middle of right now. So talk to me a little bit about kind of how you got into that distance, like when that started happening.
Yeah, it's just I didn't know anything more than 100 miles existed for a couple of years. And then I have a friend here in Salt Lake City that his name is DJ Lorchester.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2016, I saw he was doing something called the Double Crown of 200s,
Mm-hmm.
which was the Bigfoot 200 and the Tahoe 200. At the time, the Moab 200 didn't exist. And so I was following along with his journey and seeing how much that wrecked him and seeing how well he did. He set the record for the Double Crown of 200s.
Mm-hmm.
My wheels started turning, and I started texting him and asking him questions about the distance. And a couple months after that, I signed up for the Bigfoot 200 for the following year.
For 2017.
Yeah, for 2017. And I was thinking of doing the Tahoe 200 to go for his Double Crown of 200s record.
Uh-huh.
But it was like a month or so before I signed up for the Tahoe 200. The race director, Candace Burt, announced the Moab 200 edition. And I was just like, no way am I going to do that. So I didn't sign up for Tahoe, and I just trained and prepped for Bigfoot 200 for the next year.
Okay.
Yeah, did the distance and fell in love with it and signed up for the other two.
And that's the year that you won the whole Triple Crown.
Yep, that was 2017.
Wow. And for listeners, just a little background on this. So it's about 645 miles total in about 2.5 months over these 3 events. And the Moab 200 is actually 240 miles. Is that right?
Yes.
So yeah, it is not 200 miles. So it's a pretty intense and pretty massive accomplishment. So congrats to you. And you just won and set a record at Bigfoot 200 a month ago. So that's pretty awesome. You're probably pretty stoked to be going into Tahoe and going after some new goals there, right?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Awesome.
Bigfoot 200 was as perfect of a race as I could have.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely going to get into details of that. Before I do that, though, this is one of the big reasons I wanted to bring you on my podcast, because a lot of the people I talk to, are more carb-based athletes. That's kind of the more standard thing. But more and more we're hearing about low-carb, high-fat diets, ketogenic style diets, in the endurance world, becoming fat adapted, all of that. So, that's something that you adopted at some point. And I really want to hear about. It sounds like you were kind of just dabbling in a bunch of different stuff when you first got started. And then now you've made your way to this style of eating. So I'm really curious to hear all about how you got into it, what motivated you to explore this diet, and how you've, dialed it in to make that work for you now.
To take a back step, I do work for Ultra Footwear.
Mm-hmm.
Right now I'm the event manager. So I'm just over all of our sponsored events. Until a couple months ago, I was also over our elite athlete team.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're growing as a company. So I was able to just focus on events, and we have somebody that's over athletes now. But before she came into the picture, and before the person over the athletes came into the picture, I was over the elite athletes. And in 2017, so a little bit before the Triple Crown of 200s,
mm-hmm.
we had an athlete summit in Zion, Utah, where we flew in all of our athletes to Salt Lake City, and we had some vans rented, and we all drove down to Zion to have a little bit of a retreat.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was really fun. And on the drive down, it was me and I was driving, and the athlete that was in the front seat with me was Jeff Browning.
Mm-hmm.
So he's yeah, I could talk all day about how amazing of a runner that guy is. He's about 48 or 49, and he's taking top 10 at Western States 100.
Wow.
Like a pretty prestigious 100-miler in the country. And he's taking top 10 every year. He's winning races every year. He's getting better the older he gets. And anyone that really follows ultra running and knows Jeff Browning knows that he's a big advocate of the low carb, high fat movement.
Mm-hmm.
So on the drive down, he and I were talking, and naturally the nutrition came up, and he told me about the diet. And it was like a 5-hour drive to Zion. So I'd say out of that 5 hours, there's about 3.5 to 4 hours that we were talking about the ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it got me super curious, especially since I was seeing how well he was performing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he describes it just made complete sense to me on how it could help an endurance athlete if you strategically use it correctly. So 2 weeks after that summit, I started it.
How long before the Triple Crown was this?
So the timing was kind of bad because it was when our son was born.
Oh my goodness.
I started the day before our son was born.
Oh my goodness.
So we had all these people that were bringing us dinners and stuff, and I couldn't eat any of it.
Wow. That takes some discipline and commitment, I guess.
Yeah. So he was born April 19th. So I started April 18th or 17th. Uh-huh. And then the Triple Crown of 200 started August 9th. So it was a few months that I was tinkering with it before the Triple Crown started.
I imagine just the adjustment period of getting into that and training would be difficult.
Yeah, it was very difficult. There's a lot of people that start this diet and kind of fall off of the wagon because there's a thing called keto flu, mm-hmm. which most people will end up going through when they go through the keto or when they start the keto diet.
Yeah.
Do you want me to describe what the keto diet is? Or
yeah, well, I mean, in full disclosure, I work with all kinds of athletes, right? I'm not just working with endurance people. I work with recreational, kind of shorter distance athletes. I work with non-runners. Keto is such a buzzword, and it has been for a while. It's like keto and intermittent fasting, right?
Right.
Those are probably top 2 questions I get, especially in January. It's always January. It's everyone wants to do that and Whole30, and I kind of roll my eyes and I'm like, okay, well, I don't recommend this for a number of reasons, because for most people, it's not really sustainable and it doesn't make sense. Right. In the endurance world, there are some situations where it clearly works very well for certain people who do it right, and it may make sense. But, it's not something I typically am recommending to people. So I'm as curious as I'm sure many other people to kind of hear how it works for you, because I haven't really talked at length and in detail with, an athlete at your level, who's really running successfully, winning events, et cetera, who does this. And yeah, maybe we can get into the details a little bit about what keto is all about. I mean, there isn't really a definition of what low carb is. So obviously it varies a little bit, but in order to be in dietary ketosis, normally you have to be under, say, 50 grams of carbs or something like that, maybe even less than that. I'm sure that for different athletes who are following a low carb, high fat or ketogenic style diet, it looks a little bit different for everybody, right? And then there's that adjustment period where you are going through that keto flu. But yeah, so why don't you just talk to us a little bit about your own experience, what you do, is being keto or ketogenic style, that style of eating, is that something you do year round, or is it something you cycle through? How it just relates to you? Because I know it will look different from person to person.
Perfect. So yeah, there's a thing called keto flu that people go through when they start the keto diet. The best way to describe it is you feel like death. The time that you feel this way is different for each individual. Mm-hmm. Some people it lasts a couple of weeks, some people it lasts a couple of months. For me, it lasted a couple of months. So it was really hard to stick with it when I started.
Yeah.
Every single run that I went on, I felt exhausted. I felt like I didn't have any kick. I felt tired all the time. So I also do strength training with my training for ultra running. Mm-hmm. I remember there was one day I was at the gym and I was sitting down to do a dumbbell shoulder press. And I almost fell asleep just sitting there holding the dumbbells because I was so tired.
Yeah. So how do you push through that?
Well, so Jeff, I owe him a lot. I texted him a lot early on, and I still do text him sometimes when I have questions because I feel like I don't have it 100% figured out at times. Mm-hmm. But I just texted him, and he just kept telling me to hold on. And then he would give me some remedies that he would hope would work. Finally, when I just felt like I was at my breaking point, I finally found that kick again and was able to feel like a normal runner again. But that unfortunately took 2.5 to 3 months. before I felt that.
But that was putting you right up against the Bigfoot 200.
Yes. Yeah.
So prepping for
Yeah.
that must have been really challenging. Wow.
It was very challenging.
So what were you doing in your training runs then? Because I know, with this style of diet, it's not that you're not having any carbohydrates at all. Obviously, you're just being really strategic about how you use them. So it's usually low carb, high fat, moderate protein. Obviously, you need a certain amount of protein to recover, and especially when it comes to high volume training and racing. So yeah, talk a little bit about kind of what you were doing in this period of time, even though you weren't feeling great, obviously, but you were still trying to kind of stick to a plan.
Right. I probably wasn't doing it right.
Okay.
I tried during those times to just not eat anything.
Oh, okay.
During my training.
But how long were your training runs for a 200 miler? I mean, what was like your longest training effort?
There was one day I did like a big back-to-back effort where I went so I did eat something on this run, I guess, but it was like a 60-mile run. And then I met my wife at the end of that 60 miles and we camped out for 4 or 5 hours. And then I got up and went for another 5-hour run. I was just trying to train my body to grasp running a very long distance, sleeping a very short amount of time, and then getting up and continuing for a long distance.
So yeah, so what did you eat, drink? Like what was going on there?
Those Justin almond butter packets?
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of those.
Okay.
I was trying to get more of my carbs from nuts. From a more of a nut-based standpoint. I did some jerky. There was a hydration that I used and that I still use called Gnarly Hydration. Just has some electrolytes in it, and it's a pretty low carb based drink. It has like 6 grams of carbs per serving.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to get a little bit of carbs, but I was still trying to teach my body to rely on my fat storage.
And like the intensity of these efforts, would you say they were fairly low?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because a big part of training for a 200 is power hiking.
Yeah.
Because at some point of the race, you're going to start power hiking. So I did a lot of hiking, especially in areas where I felt I could run still. So
Mm-hmm.
I would consider the intensity efforts very, very low.
Okay. So even when you're like hiking up a mountain, the intensity level is relatively low.
Yeah, it gets up. Like looking back, I don't think I know I wasn't training correctly with the low carb, high fat.
Mm-hmm.
Like now I strategically use like a Spring Energy or a Honey Stinger like at the beginning of a big climb to give myself a little bit of a spike.
Yeah.
So now I consciously strategically use my carbs a lot more during training and racing, but at that time I didn't fully grasp that that's what I needed to do, so I wasn't doing that.
Got it. And what about like kind of your everyday nutrition throughout this period as you were exploring this style of eating? What did that look like?
So for the first 6 months when I started this, I was very, very strict, keeping my carbs between 30 to 50 grams a day.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those carbs coming from sauteed vegetables.
Oh man, so no more gallons of milk for you.
No more milk.
And you're going to start eating vegetables.
Yeah, I know. I talked to a lot of people that have different opinions about this lifestyle, but
mm-hmm.
the one thing that I always end with was, hey, it got me eating vegetables.
There you go.
I love my vegetables now.
Great.
Yeah. So the first 6 months, very low carb, very strict, very high fat, like a lot of 80% lean, 20% fat ground beef, some thicker, fattier cuts of steak,
mm-hmm.
Some Greek salads with olive oil. So yeah, first 6 months was very, very strict just to get my body very familiar with ketosis.
Any fruit?
The first 6 months was just vegetable.
Okay. So you're in any starchy vegetables or just non-starchy vegetables mostly?
Non-starchy. Okay. So I mostly stuck to green vegetables.
Okay.
And then, like pecans, pistachios, like even some nuts have a little bit of carbs. Sure. So I'd get them from that too.
Got it. Did you miss dairy? Did you miss sweets like fruit? Like was that especially, you have a new baby. So that was a really huge time. This is your first child. That's a huge transition. Like so many transitions all at once. What was that like? So
I guess the fortunate thing for me with dairy is 2 years before I started keto, my parents sold the cows.
Oh, so no more dairy.
I tried the store-bought milk and the taste is so different. I couldn't do it. So I kind of gave up milk already at that point.
Okay. All right. Well, that made it easy.
Yeah, that made it easy. But like anyone that knew me before I started this, I was drinking 2 12 packs of Mountain Dew every week.
Oh, wow.
So I loved my soda. I loved my bowl of ice cream before bed. So that I did miss that quite often.
Okay.
And in the early years of starting keto, or the early days, I cheated a little bit more than I should have, especially like after a race.
Hmm.
I would reward myself for like 3 days with whatever I wanted, which in hindsight was not good.
Well, do you really think it's not good though? I know this is kind of like your, and I'm challenging you a little bit here. I know this is like your style of eating, but if you truly enjoy those things, especially after, it's not like you're even running like a 10K or a marathon. These are like huge races that you're doing. Do you really feel like that's a bad thing, just to kind of enjoy what you want to enjoy?
The way I was doing it, yes, because I had no control.
So you're like just binging on it.
Yeah, like I would eat. Yeah, I would have 2 to 3 shakes from Dairy Queen a day. I'd go get all the fried food I could from Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Yeah.
like that. Like if I did it with more control, then I wouldn't have felt like I like messed up, but I lost control.
And I imagine, just because most of your eating every day is, does not include those types of foods. So it's not like, oh, I'm just going to have a little bit of ice cream now. Like that's not something that sounds like it's a part of your daily life anymore. So I imagine, especially when you're in a caloric deficit, when you've completed this massive effort, I'd be surprised if you could control yourself, right? You're in this deficit, you're exhausted, you're depleted, and you're around these foods that you don't really allow yourself to have ever. And I guess that's one argument against, this, or is why some people struggle with this style of eating as a way of life, especially if they're not basically a professional athlete as you are yourself, because you go from one extreme to the other and it's kind of hard to find any middle ground ever. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree that this is not for everybody. There's people that thrive off of no meat. There's people that thrive off of whatever, that can eat whatever they want.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But for me, like I was just finding that I wasn't thriving. I tried being a vegetarian, like everything that I was trying, I was not thriving off of it. And this is something that I started working for me from the beginning, and my body clicks with it.
Yeah.
And it's something that I still cheat, but I cheat with the good stuff sometimes. Like I'll have a fruit smoothie or two, or I'll get a dark chocolate bar. Like, I still don't follow it 100% at times, especially
Okay.
around high volume. But I feel like I'm cheating a little bit more with like better foods, which is fine for me now because that's what I like now.
Yeah. I don't like to call it cheating. You're just enjoying food, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You're just living your life, enjoying food. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm glad
yeah.
to hear that too. But yeah, I do agree, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is just really demonstrating that, there is no one single way of eating for everybody, that it's really just about experimenting, and also depends on what you're doing. Like you were doing something pretty unique here. Not many people are out there running 200 miles and going for the Triple Crown and that kind of stuff, so some people are just running a few miles or hopping on the bike, or so maybe it doesn't make sense to do a keto style diet, but for you it does, or maybe it does make sense for them. So it's really just about figuring out what works best for you. So it's pretty awesome that you kind of got to this point and you stuck with it. So going back to that 2017 Triple Crown, so that's the one that you won.
Yes.
So that must have been affirming of kind of this style of eating for you. Tell me kind of a bit about that whole race experience and the nutrition that you brought into it.
For the listeners who don't fully know what the ketogenic diet is, just a quick, brief explanation of it. Our bodies have a huge fat storage, but we typically don't get to that storage often and burn it. Our body burns carbs a lot easier. And so people who adapt the ketogenic diet they're trying to teach their bodies to burn fat for fuel over, not over carbs. I believe that you can burn fat for fuel and carbs for fuel.
Yeah, we do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the ketogenic diet is basically training your body to be more efficient with burning your fat storage. And so for me, before I started the ketogenic diet, I found myself in this kind of circle when I was doing my races. I consider myself I'm a bigger runner. I weigh about 180 pounds. A lot of runners are height hovering in the 150 range.
How tall are you?
I'm 6 foot.
Okay, so but you're a tall guy though.
Yeah, I'm tall, but I still feel like I'm a little bit broader for a runner. And so during my races, I needed a little bit more calories to get myself through the race. But it got to the point where I would just have stomach issues because my body had a hard time digesting those calories. And so the next race, I would go into a calorie deficit mode where I didn't want to have stomach issues, which ended up working. But then I would end up, the term is bonking, where I would just lose all sorts of energy and just not have a good race. And so I'd just get in this vicious cycle where I'd have no energy or I'd have stomach issues or a little bit of both. And it just wasn't working for me. And so for the Triple Crown of 200s in 2017, the thing that I noticed right away, well, not right away, I still had some stomach issues at Bigfoot. Part of that was because I wasn't taking enough salt. But, once I fixed that, that went away. But for Tahoe 200 and Moab 200, I had no stomach issues, which was huge for me because it was, the combination of the two was 440 miles. So it felt so good to be able to go into those races and not have stomach issues and have a steady energy source to carry me through it. So
how'd you get there in terms of nutrition? Like, what was the difference?
The main difference was just my salt intake.
Okay.
I didn't have the understanding at the time that when you follow this lifestyle, this diet, that you do lose more salt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I don't scientifically know why. I just know that you do lose more salt, and so I wasn't taking enough salt at Bigfoot, and I talked to Jeff Browning about it, and that was his recommendation. So at Tahoe, I started taking more salt, and I had no stomach issues.
In what form were you taking it? Like in a drink or salt pills, or what were you
Salt
doing?
pills.
Salt pills. Okay.
Yeah.
How often were you taking them in?
I would change it each time during the race. Like at night when it was a little bit cooler, I would do one an hour. Whereas during the heat of the day, I was doing one every 30 minutes to 45 minutes.
That's a lot of salt pills because this event's taking several. How many days is it taking?
It could take up to 5 days. I finished in 3 days, so it is a lot of salt.
and so kind of while we're on the topic of duration, talk to me a little bit about like the logistics of, these 200 milers. I mean, 100, that's also logistically challenging, but like, are there crews? Are there aid stations? I mean, I imagine they're slightly smaller events. You're covering more ground. Do you have drop bags? And you need actual food and need more of it. So like, what does that look like for these events?
The race director does very well at having some good real food at these aid stations.
How often are there aid stations?
So for an ultra, they're actually fairly spread out. They're anywhere from 10 to 24 miles.
Okay.
Most ultras that I've done are anywhere from 5 to 10 miles. So you do have to carry a little bit more with you in your running vest.
Especially water, I imagine.
Yeah, especially water. It's also wise to carry one of those flasks that filter water for you. But yeah, so I carry a lot of food with me, but at the aid station, she has burgers, she has quesadillas, she has soups, she has potatoes, she has bacon, and then a bunch of fruits, a bunch of potatoes. So you have access to that every 10 to 25 miles. You can have a crew almost equates to every other aid station.
Okay.
A couple are in a row, but you can see your crew fairly often in terms of how many aid stations there are. And then drop bags, most of the aid stations are accessible for drop bags, and a lot of them it's kind of cool. They are moving drop bags. So if you have a drop bag for mile 50 aid station, that drop bag will also be at mile 175.
Okay.
And so she has a few aid stations set up like that where your drop bag will transfer to it later on in the race.
Got it. What are you carrying on you usually? And what's kind of like your strategy with nutrition in terms of products versus real food? How frequently, or are you thinking calories per hour? Like, how are you approaching all of this?
So in terms of nutrition, the thing that I've learned even with this diet is when you're racing, sometimes all times you gotta throw out the rules and do what your body needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll know what you need, like you'll crave stuff. And so for me, over the years, I've learned that the things I crave most are fruits and Pringles.
Pringles. Yeah. Once you pop, you
Pringles.
can't stop, right?
Yep. So for me, I had I had a Ziploc baggie in my vest with me full of Pringles.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just munch on those a little bit every hour and then refill those at every aid station. I also carried those freeze dried fruit with me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I used to do dehydrated fruit, and I found that, like, especially in the heat of the day, it was really hard to chew and swallow dehydrated fruit.
Yeah, it's sticky.
Yeah, very sticky, very hard, and then I'd just lose my appetite and not want to eat at all.
Yeah.
And so with the freeze dried, they crunch very easily and they go down very easily.
My toddler's obsessed with the strawberries. Like, if I don't have a thing of freeze dried strawberries at all times, she like loses her mind.
Yeah, I feel her. I do too.
Those things are good.
So yeah, freeze dried fruit, and then at the aid station, something that I experimented with at Bigfoot that I feel really worked is I had my wife have one of those very big containers of the Bolt House smoothies that you can like find at Walmart or Target.
Oh, okay. What's in those?
Tons of different ones, but the one that I had was a strawberry banana.
Is there protein in it too, or is it just fruit?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, protein.
Okay.
And so I'd come in there and drink some of that at every aid station, and then I'd drink some apple juice and grape juice. I just tried to keep it as fruit and oriented as possible, and it seemed to work.
So you're going for lots of carbs, it sounds like. You're grabbing carbs, you're grabbing salts, you have things with protein and fat, but it's not like you're just munching off of like olives and coconut and nut butters, which, I mean, of course, when you're running too, I mean, granted, you're power hiking, you're going more slowly, it's not as high intensity, but so you are able to kind of digest more things. But, with such high fat stuff, I imagine you have to have a pretty iron stomach to handle that. You have to really train your stomach. Yeah. Even with fruits, I mean, there's fiber in there, but it sounds like you have a pretty strong stomach for the most part with taking on food.
Yeah, it took some time to get to that point. But I mean, as I was saying earlier, like we're not trying to just burn fat during these races. That we're trying to just be better at burning fat, and we still eat carbs strategically. Mm-hmm. Like I said, at a big hill climb, I'll eat a little bit more carbs than what I do later on in the race. The difference is we just don't eat as many carbs as a typical runner would, where instead of having like a goo every hour, we'd have like a goo every hour and a half or every hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
So still use carbs strategically because carbs are important for energy, but just not do it as much.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, so you are still using you mentioned honey stingers, you mentioned some other products. You are still taking on, some standard sports nutrition type products and then working some food in to kind of reach your calorie goals. But it doesn't sound like you're necessarily being like, I must reach X number of grams of carbs per hour or calories. You're also just listening to your body and all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And do you have, I mean, imagine like when you're racing for 3+ days and you're functioning on very little sleep, and of course keeping in mind too that you're doing these 3 huge events in 2.5 months, so recovery is you have to really be dialed in for that as well. I imagine appetite can be really tough sometimes. You must have to kind of force those calories in. It's not always like yes, you can listen to your body, but at the same time there must be like these instances where you do not want to take anything on, but you need something. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. And like, I feel that you do need to get calories to some point when you're not feeling like it, but you also don't want to overdo it.
Yeah.
Because it could be like, you could be on the bridge of vomiting or just sending yourself into this area where your just stomach will not come back from it. I don't know if you've experienced this before, but there's been times where like I've just pushed it too much with the food and like my stomach just hurts for the rest of the race.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's definitely a balance, but the thing that I've found that works best for me is when I'm not feeling like I can eat, the best way to get the calories are liquid-based calories.
What's your favorite product that you use for that?
So for my electrolytes, I use Gnarly. Unfortunately, they're still younger and they don't have a calorie-based drink quite yet. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I need a calorie-based drink, I honestly just turn to juice.
Okay, it's whatever works.
Yeah, for the Bigfoot 200, I had 4 water bottles with me. 2 of them being water, 1 of them being Gnarly, and then 1 of them being either like 100% pure apple juice or grape juice or orange juice.
Okay, great.
It was actually my first time experimenting with that, and I know you're not supposed to experiment on race day.
Hey, it worked out for you, I guess.
Yeah.
And do you have any tips? I get asked all the time about training your gut. Can you train your gut, or what's the best way of going about that when people are dabbling in working in real food, or just even some people have trouble just tolerating gels or chews or just standard products, like if they're road racing. What tips or tricks would you share, if any, about kind of training your stomach to take on more calories?
So I have a couple, but the biggest one that I would recommend is experimenting with all of the brands, because there is something out there that will work for somebody. And as we were saying earlier, there's so many different brands out there of nutrition and electrolytes. And so I would recommend every long run, if you're doing a long run once a week, every long run, have a couple different brands with you, like Goo, Honey Stinger, Spring, Hammer, whatever it is, but just have a couple different ones with you. And on that long run, try as many different ones as you can in the time that you're out there.
So you like to try them all together?
I mean, earlier on, I would do that when I was trying to find the brand that I liked the best. But now that I have found something that works for me, I just use the one brand. But yeah, so I think it's important to try all the ones that you can at once. Like not at once, but like during one long run. And then just being very consistent with eating during your long runs, so that you're just getting your body used to running and eating. Because if you're not training while eating, then it's going to be really hard to get used to it while you're racing, because you don't race near as much as you train.
Absolutely. Often, as I mentioned kind of earlier, keto and intermittent fasting sometimes go hand in hand. People are often exploring both at once. Is intermittent fasting something that you ever dabbled in or you ever do, or is that not something that you do?
Yeah, I do it once or twice a week. And I more often or not try to do a carb fast every day.
What does that mean for you?
So for me, that means I try to only get my carbs between like 3 in the afternoon and 7 at night.
And what's the reasoning behind that for you?
During high blocks of training, I'm sometimes getting 160 grams of carbs a day.
Mm-hmm. Which is very low, listeners. Just so you're aware.
Yeah, it's still low, but it's not ketogenic low.
Yeah. Are you still in dietary ketosis at that point? I mean, are you even measuring if you are?
At this point, I'm not anymore. And for my body at that point, I'm not in nutritional ketosis.
Yeah.
But I'm hovering the line of it. And so if so just by having those carbs from 3 to 7, I piled in right there. And one of for people who aren't following a strict ketogenic diet, a way to get into ketosis is fasting.
Got it.
So so I'm hovering the line between 3 and 7. And then I stop eating carbs for 20 hours. And so by not eating carbs for 20 hours and upping my fat for the next 20 hours, I can dip back into nutritional ketosis while still eating carbs. I'm having a hard time talking.
No worries. Join the club.
So I'm eating high fats, but I'm still able to eat carbs to help myself recover. I'm still eating carbs to help myself have some energy, but I can still dip into nutritional ketosis the next day because I'm going for a carb fast.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that people don't really understand fully. And again, I'm getting a lot of people who are just kind of recreational athletes. They want it more for weight loss than performance. Yep. And they're like, okay, I'm doing this intermittent fasting thing, or I'm doing keto. And they don't really understand that there's a strategy behind it and that the timing is incredibly important. You still need carbs for higher intensities. You still need, after big effort, to have protein, which certain amino acids, like parts of it, can be converted to glucose. So, you need protein and carbohydrate to recover effectively. So you still need those things right after a workout. Or, with intermittent fasting, people are doing it every day and they're never eating breakfast, but they're working out quite hard at 6 a.m. and then not eating anything for like 4 hours, so people just aren't going about it the right way. So I think just like with being a vegan and people are all worried about protein, like you can absolutely be on a plant-based diet, a fully vegan diet, get everything you need and run successfully or do whatever you want successfully. You just have to be very strategic and careful about your choices. And it sounds like it's very much the same thing with being on a ketogenic style diet. it's just much more restrictive, and you have to be even more careful about it, depending on how active you are. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I would agree.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's talk about recovery for a second. And you're kind of like in the midst of this right now. So, obviously everything has to be super dialed in when you're racing 645 miles in 2.5 months. When you have such a relentless and high volume training racing schedule, how much time are you typically taking off after each race? How are you changing up your nutrition at all to kind of optimize recovery? What does this period of time look like for you? And also, you're not exactly in a low stress situation. You're moving house, you're expecting another baby in December. Like, there's a lot going on here. So talk to me a little bit about how you handle all of this.
Well, the big thing, I have a very patient wife.
Very, very, very important to have a good support system, for sure.
Yeah. She's great. She's 26, 27 weeks pregnant. She wants to crew me at these races.
That's awesome.
She takes care of our son each day while I'm at work, and she's even patient enough to let me to go out for a run.
Yeah. When do you find time to train? Are you getting up crazy early? Like, what's going on there? Because you're working full time and training for these really long events.
Yeah, I typically, right now is just a little bit weird because we're in the transition of moving to Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just trying to go running when I have time. Before we got into this craziness, I was getting up at 5 a.m. every day to get my run in before they would wake up.
Yep, that's what my husband does.
It's hard, but you got to make sacrifices sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's totally worth it when you have a family.
And how does sleep play into all this? Obviously it's very important for recovery, and it affects your ability to train and make food decisions and everything. And you have a newborn that's coming on the scene soon. Like, although I will say your timing is impeccable, because December is right after all the big races are kind of over. So that's awesome for you.
It's the off season.
Yeah. But yeah, sleep obviously is important. I know there are some runners out there, like Mike McKnight's a really big one that, functions on very little sleep. Yeah. How do you kind of handle the sleep aspect too?
So yeah, in terms of recovery, what you're asking earlier about nutrition, I'm eating the amount of carbs that I would eat if I was training heavily right now.
Uh-huh.
Typically when I'm in a recovery mode and don't have a race coming up, I would go a little bit more lower carb and higher protein.
Like more in that 50 gram area?
Probably 60 to 70.
Okay.
But, for the past month, since Bigfoot, I've upped my protein a little bit higher than what I would do. And then I've also been doing the 150 or so carbs.
Are you counting, or do you just know at this point what it looks like?
It's funny you asked that, because this last week I actually started tracking it with an app just to see if I was on point or not.
Okay. So you just kind of use it here and there to check in with yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I am tracking it, and all of these carbs are coming from either vegetables, fruits, or an occasional red or sweet potato.
Got it.
So a less starchy potato. And so I'm eating a little bit higher carb and higher protein than I typically would if I didn't have a race that was just right around the corner. Mm-hmm. Because I'm still trying to recover and build at the same time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, so sorry, to take one more back step. Before every race, and I'm doing that with this as well. Yesterday, I started a low carb reset. So the 2 weeks before the race starts, I'll go back to the 30 to 40 grams a day just to get used to always being in ketosis.
Okay.
And then 3 days before the race, I'll get back out of it and then top my glycogen storage off and go back up to about 150 grams a day for 3 days before the race.
So that's kind of like your quote unquote carbo loading time, like the 3 or 4 days before you're going to like 150-ish grams. That's kind of your top end at this point.
Yeah.
When you're not racing, at least.
Correct.
Got it. And what about protein? There are certain guidelines about how much protein we need as just sedentary healthy adults, 0.8 to 1, if we're looking at the RDA, gram per kilogram body weight. And then, as you go, more towards like endurance athletes, bodybuilding, all that kind of stuff, like we go all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram. But in a keto style diet, it's more moderate protein. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing that I struggle with on the ketogenic diet. Mm-hmm. This is the one that I'm constantly trying to figure out what level is good for me with protein. But yeah, as you were saying earlier, your protein can be converted to glycogen and can kick you out of ketosis. So a lot of people who start doing keto specifically to lose weight, they're just always talking about how much meat they're eating.
Yeah, and they're doing that wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not as much meat as you think it is. like I was saying earlier, for lunch, I try to have a Greek salad and not have any meat for lunch. So just oil, some vinegar, olives, spinach, a bunch of veggies, but just getting my fat at that meal from oil. So it's not a high meat diet, it's a high fat diet. And there are ways to get fat that's not meat. And it's different for every person. That's why I think this is the hardest one to figure out, because depending on how much you're running, depending on how much you're lifting weight, depending on how much muscle you already have, and that level of protein is different for everybody.
It must be very tricky to kind of find that balance between trying to stay in ketosis, but also make sure that you're recovering optimally and getting the protein you need for all your body's different functions, because obviously we need protein for so many different things. Where are you at now with that?
Yeah, it is tricky to figure that out for me right now. But I think the general rule that I follow and that you agree with from previous discussion, you just got to do what your body's feeling like, because your body knows what it needs, and especially during a recovery period of time. So like if I am craving some steak and eggs, then I'm going to eat some steak and eggs. I feel that when it comes to recovery, that to some point you can throw out the rules to a point. I'm not going to go eat a basket of fries and a breaded chicken breast at Wendy's, just because that's not, I'm just never going to do that. But what I will do is I will have a little bit more steak. I will have a little bit more brisket, whatever it is. And if that's what my body wants, then I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to worry too much about it, especially during recovery.
So you're in this period of recovery right now where you're in between these two huge races. And you were saying that typically after a big race, you might go more into a low carb area in your eating. And instead, you're kind of staying in that 150 gram range. So with protein as well, are you trying to make sure that you're getting a little bit more in then? Or
yeah,
got it.
As I said, typically when I'm recovering, I'm recovering and my next race isn't for another 3 or 4 months. So I will be more strict, and I will watch my levels of carbohydrates and protein a little bit more during that time, because I have more time to work with. But right now, where I just have 4 weeks, I'm trying to focus on recovering and being ready for the next race. And I feel that it's important for me to have what my body's craving during this time. So yeah, I'm not monitoring it as much right now in between these races.
Got it. So let's go back to everyday nutrition for a second, especially with you with a growing family, a toddler. I'm not sure how your wife eats, if she's active at all, et cetera. But I mean, are you doing the cooking, your wife, both? How does it play into just like family dynamics and trying to kind of be a part of family meals and all of that? Does that make it extra tricky for you, or are you managing it okay?
We're managing it okay. I make my own breakfast every day, typically because by the time I'm done running and getting ready for work, my wife and son are still asleep. So I make my own breakfast, and then I pack my own lunch. And then for dinner, we've just adopted because really, I mean, unless you're a vegetarian or you don't eat meat, like you can make it work, because, my wife, she likes meat. So at dinner, we'll make the same meat, but we might just make different sides. So she might have a pot of rice cooking for her on the stove, and on the next stove, some zucchini and squash sauteed up for me. So, we have the same base every night for dinner, but then we're just making different sides.
Okay.
And then our son, I want him to eat healthy. And for a kid, I believe that they need to get whatever they like, grains, everything. But
yeah,
he's at that age where if I can get him to eat a plate of chicken nuggets, and I'm happy. So
yeah, that's where we're at too.
Yeah.
If she eats an egg, I'm like, oh my God, amazing. Yeah, no, I feel you. Okay, awesome. So you're kind of just modifying a little bit, but basically having kind of the same template of a meal, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Awesome. And aside from kind of the protein part of it, are there challenges you're still facing with your nutrition, whether it's racing, training, everyday stuff, or do you feel like you've got it pretty dialed in at this point?
I feel like I got it pretty dialed in. Aside from the protein, I'd say the other thing I'm still not 100% confident in is how often to have those carbs and calories during the race. Just because, everybody's different, and the advice I get are from people who are smaller than me, or like their body's just different than me. So I'm still not 100% confident with that, but I feel pretty good about everything else.
Okay. And when you started this whole diet, did you notice that your body changed a lot as a result, or not so much?
I did notice a big difference for me. So in high school, I actually was a little bit overweight. And so even after starting running, and probably because I was having so much sugar in my diet, but specifically like where my lower abdomens are, I've always had this area that I could never get to tighten up. So I have noticed ever since focusing on this diet that I have tightened up quite a bit in that area and in other areas that I thought I would never tighten up in. So I feel like it has helped me lean out a little bit more, not unhealthily, but.
And of course, in terms of what's on the horizon for you, so these two big races, how are you feeling about Tahoe and Moab? Are you excited, nervous, feeling ready to go, especially in the context of everything else going on in your life?
With everything else going on in my life, I'm actually not stressed at all right now because
baby, a new house, nothing big.
Well, I mean, for Western States, we made an offer on a house like a day before the race.
Wow.
So like we've had all these unknowns for all these other races, but it's like right now I have my house bought. I know what day I'm moving. So like right now I'm actually not stressed at all with that. I'm feeling pretty good about Tahoe and Moab, mainly because I remember 2 years ago I was completely wrecked after Bigfoot and I didn't run once in between Bigfoot and Tahoe.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I was sore. I was tired. I didn't feel like I could loosen up. I was super nervous. I mean, I've been running every other day, and doing some good strength training like a week after Bigfoot, and I feel great. I feel like I have my speed back,
Nice.
and I feel mentally there. So I'm pretty stoked.
Do you take like a full week off, after the event?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I finished on a Sunday, took a week off, and then started running on Monday.
Okay. And I know you run, like you mentioned, Western States. I know you won a 100-miler back in March. I imagine some of these races are kind of training races for you in preparation for these 200s, or, what are kind of your A races typically, or does that vary? Like, is the 200 always like your main focus? Is that kind of, would you call it your thing, or is it just something that you've been particularly successful in and it's just like another race that you're trying to do your best in?
I definitely think, I'll be a little bit more confident in saying it's my thing after I see how Tahoe and Moab goes.
Yeah.
Because I do have that slight worry in me that I went a little too hard for Bigfoot, considering that I have these other two races coming up. Where 2 years ago, I felt like I held back a little bit just to have the energy for the other two. So I'll feel more confident in saying 200 miles is my thing after the next two. But I feel generally speaking that 100 miles to 200 miles are my distances, and anything shorter than that, I haven't quite figured out yet.
Awesome. Any kind of like FKTs or anything, like would you go longer than the 200 miles or longer than 240? Is that ever of interest to you, or are you just sticking with this for now?
I do have interest to do, it's called Big's Backyard Ultra.
Yeah. Maggie and I were chatting about that. She's doing that this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one sounds very interesting.
But I mean, FKTs and stuff, I might get into that one day, but for now, the thing that works so good with my job is like a lot of these races I end up running are races that we sponsor as a company.
Perfect.
And
yeah.
So, it works out in my schedule a lot just to do these races right now.
Got it.
I'm sure I'll look into it one day.
Awesome. So let's wrap up by going into what I call my quick bites questions. So I'm just going to kind of rapid fire some questions at you, and then I'll send you off on your way. Favorite meal or snack when in a hurry?
When in a hurry, my favorite snack, it's called Alter Eco. The chocolate brand?
I've never heard of that one.
Well, it's either Echo or Eco, but Alter Eco dark chocolate coconut clusters.
Yum.
I would say that those are my biggest addiction right now.
Okay, nice. Favorite meal or snack when you're not in a hurry?
Prime rib and a sweet potato.
Favorite post-race meal or snack?
Favorite snack is a pint of the coconut milk based ice cream that So Delicious makes. Yeah, ice cream.
Ice cream. Many of these things, by the way, are not in line with your ketogenic style diet. I'm just going to point out. By the way, I don't know if you ever find yourself in New York, there's a company called Van Leeuwen that has cashew-based ice cream that's amazing.
Ooh.
It's so good. So we'll jump to that question then, the ice cream question. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Mint chocolate chip.
Nice. And what's the most bizarre or exotic food that you've ever tried?
It's called balut. Have you heard of that?
No. What is it?
It's a Filipino-based food, and it is I forgot the term, but it's an egg that has a duck inside of it that's already like started to develop.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting / crazy.
Yeah. There's like talons, there's feathers.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Wow, that's intense. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll just jump right into the egg question then. How do you like your eggs cooked? Hopefully not with talons, but and
No.
feathers.
No, I like them over easy.
Nice. Do you drink? And if so, what's your favorite beverage?
I do not drink, but my favorite beverage is Topo Chico sparkling water.
Nice. Okay. Which carbs do you miss the most?
Deep fried cheese curds, or just fried food in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle. Obviously, I know your Ultra shoes, of course.
Yep.
And 2 other things.
2 other things, my Rudy Project prescription glasses. I'm blind without them, and contacts hurt my eyes, so these glasses are perfect for me for running.
Mm-hmm.
And then my Injinji socks, just because I hate feeling that my feet are compressed and trapped, and having the toe socks really make me feel like I'm not.
I love Injinjis. I wear those for my long runs too.
Yeah, they're so nice.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Mike, for coming on. This is really an interesting discussion. I learned a lot about the ketogenic style diet, especially in relation to ultra running. And I'm really stoked about, you going into Tahoe and Moab, and I can't wait to hear how it all goes.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And best of luck with that. And of course, with your baby coming up in December, do you know if you're having a boy or a girl?
We're having a girl.
Fun. And you have a boy already. So you'll get something different.
Yeah, one of each.
Girls are great. I'm having another girl. They're fantastic. I mean, boys are great too. Awesome. All right, Mike, have a good one.
Okay, thanks. You too.
And that's all for today, guys. If you'd like to follow Mike on Instagram, his handle is dirtymike_89. We definitely want to see how you do, Mike, in Moab. I'm really excited to follow along. Speaking of Instagram, he wrote this post recapping his experience at the Tahoe 200. Quote, "From the moment the race started and I felt how heavy my legs were from Bigfoot, I knew this was going to be a battle. Heavy legs ended up being the least of my worries. Going into the second night, so much bad happened which almost completely derailed my race. A faulty headlamp, which caused me to use my cell phone light. Multiple of the worst bloody noses I've ever had, which caused me to lay on the trail for minutes, multiple times to get them to stop. Losing my mind and talking to voices in my head while getting lost in a time loop. Thankfully, I had a smart, helpful wife and the drive to work through it all. So stoked to get the win and counterclockwise course record." Congrats again, Mike. We're really proud of you. And again, best of luck in Moab. All right, guys, have a good one. And as always, if you want to get in touch, my email is eatforendurance@gmail.com.